Students, in today's history class, let us explore what the changes in cultural traditions were in Europe during the period 1300 to 1800. Students, the European history can be divided into various periods as ancient period, medieval period, early modern period and modern period.
The period up to 400 AD is known as ancient period. The period between 400 AD and 1300 AD is known as medieval period. The period between 1300 AD and 1800 AD is known as early modern period. And the period from 1800 to the present is known as modern period.
Students, now let us see what were the conditions in Europe during the medieval period, that is between 400 AD to 1300 AD. The Roman Empire was the predominant power in Europe, controlling most of Europe, Turkey and Egypt for a long time in the ancient period.
During this time, the cities like Rome and Alexandria flourished. The culture, which includes sculpture, paintings, architecture, literature, philosophy and science, have been developed in places like Greece and Rome. The culture that was developed then was of a very high quality.
But the Roman Empire came to an end after 400 AD. After this, there existed no large empires in the Western Europe. At the same time, the cities also declined, which led to people living in villages. The trade also was not huge. During this time, a social system called feudalism began to dominate Europe.
In the feudal rule, the political power vests with the large warrior landlord who had control over the villages and the peasants.
The peasants were dominated by serfs who were like bondage laborers. They would act according to the words of the lords, cultivate their lands, work for them and also would fight wars for them. The serfs had their own lands on which they worked to earn their livelihood and feed their families. Students, there was high insecurity among these peasants as the lords were in a constant war with each other. At this time, the Roman Catholic Church dominated the people's culture, which stressed on the evidence to Christian faith. Students, the Roman Catholic Church played an important role in influencing the people. The Roman Catholic Church did not encourage people to think on their own. Instead, it asked the people to believe whatever the priests told them. As a result of many such developments, the cultural achievements of Europe during ancient period got lost. But the conditions began to change after 1300 AD. Let us see how. After 1300 AD, the peasants resisted the serfdom, the control of the landlords and the church.
A peasants' revolt took place in England in 1381 that brought an end to serfdom in England. There were similar movements in other countries.
As a result of such measures, the control of the lords and the church began to decline and the people began to enjoy liberations.
Long-distance trade began to flourish between the European countries and China, Arabia, India and Egypt. Many new towns and cities began to emerge that were inhabited by traders and artisans. Many of these cities were politically independent while they ruled themselves through municipalities.
Students, one important development in the Europe was the birth of Renaissance.
Renaissance or rebirth was a cultural movement that took place in Europe. The people began to think beyond the restrictions of the priests, raised questions, and also found new answers. The traders and other voyagers ventured to find out new routes and new lands. There were a lot of new developments in the areas of art, painting, sculpture, literature, and science.
In addition to all this, the people started to question the religious authorities and they wanted to find new and easy ways to reach God. A lot of information in the form of documents, paintings, books, sculptures, textiles, buildings, etc. is available that brings out the European history from the 14th century. This information has been preserved in various art galleries, archives and museums in Europe and America. In fact, this information is studied by the historians to find out the various aspects of Europeans' history. The term Renaissance began to be used from the 19th century by the historians to explain the changes in culture of the period.
Jacob Burckhardt from Switzerland was a historian who emphasized on the cultural changes in Europe. In his 1860 book, The Civilization of the Renaissance in Italy, Burckhardt points out how a new humanist culture had bloomed in Italian town between 14th to 17th centuries. According to him, the culture was characterized by a new belief that man as an individual had the ability of making his own decisions and developing new skills. In addition, he also said that man was modern, contrary to the medieval man whose thinking was influenced by the church.
Now, let us see how the Italian cities have been revived.
The expansion of trade between the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic countries led to the revival of the ports on the coast of Italy. With the opening up of the trade by Mongols with China and with the increase in trade with the Western European countries from the 12th century, the cities of Italy began to play a pivotal role.
With the growth in trade, the Italian cities thought of themselves as independent city-states. They did not see themselves as a part of the powerful empire.
Florence and Venice were republics, while the others were court cities that were ruled by princes. While Venice was one important city, Genoa was the other significant city.
These cities were different from the other cities. Neither the clergy in these cities nor the powerful feudal lords were politically dominant. The clergy are the members of church who include the priests, the bishops, the cardinals and the pope. Then, who do you think exercised power in these cities? The rich merchants and bankers took active role in the governments of the city, which helped in the increase in the spread of citizenship. When the towns were ruled by military dictators, even then the pride of citizenship of the people did not take a back seat. From the literature available of the ancient Greeks, it is clear that it indicated an interest in life. In other words, the people were highly interested in the world that they lived in. The students of the ancient Greek literature came to be known as humanists, who learnt nature and interest of man. In contrast to the interest of the scholars of Middle Ages in future life, the humanists became interested in the world. The humanists were highly interested in every aspect of nature, science and arts that affected man.
In the year 1453, Constantinople was brought down and the Ottoman Empire or the Turkish replaces the Eastern Roman Empire. At this time, most of the educated men who spoke Greek left to Italy for safety.
As a result of this, there was an increased interest among the Italians toward ancient Greek literature and the Greek language. Knowledge of a little Greek became a fashion in Italy at that point of time.
This also led to the spread of humanism in Italy, which eventually spread to France, England and Netherlands also.
New universities were established to teach law and religions. This attracted the attention of educated men.
Erasmus, a Dutchman, was one of these educated men who seriously took up the study of New Testament in the original Greek language and the writings of the early Greek Christians.
Erasmus also made criticisms of the beliefs of the church in his book Praise of Folly. According to him, their beliefs were based on superstitions. It was during the period of Renaissance that the humanist scholars obtained volumes from Arabs and retranslated them into Greek and Latin to study. The humanist ideas spread themselves to the arts and architecture also. Realism emerged in the areas of visual arts like painting and sculpture.
The artists studied nature, people and places in their surroundings and tried to create replicas of them. The artists tried to portray themes from their surroundings as well as from Greek and Roman literatures that pointed out various feelings of human beings. This was completely in contrast to the religious art that was promoted by the church in the feudal era, which stressed on religious themes and representation according to some ideal forms.
In fact, the religious art did not encourage representation of reality. It instead emphasized on representation of only ideal forms. Students, the art in Renaissance era on the other hand studied the real world. In addition to this, the artists in the Renaissance age also studied the remains of buildings, sculpture, etc. of the Roman culture. The admiration for the very old sculptures of perfectly proportioned men and women influenced to continue the trend.
Donatello in the year 1416 came out with realistic statues.
Students, another very interesting thing is that the scientists help the artists in being accurate. For example, to study the structures of bones, the artists referred to labs of medical schools.
A Belgian medical professor at the University of Padua, Andreas Vesalius, stands first in dissecting the human body, which laid the foundation for modern physiology. Great artists like Leonardo da Vinci, in order to make their paintings and sculpture realistic, studied anatomy of human beings. Leonardo da Vinci is well known for his paintings of Mona Lisa and The Last Supper.
In addition, the artists also thought geometry was an effective tool in understanding perspective. The knowledge of geometry, according to them, helped in taking down the changing quality of light so that a three-dimensional quality can be given to their art pieces.
The use of oil colors enhanced the richness of the paintings. Also, the influence of Chinese and Persian art can be highly felt in the colors and designs of costumes of many paintings.
Students, this was how geometry, physics, anatomy, aesthetic sense brought a new trend in Italian art, which has been termed as realism. This trend continued till the 19th century in Italy. The church also was in support of the new art that took birth in Italy.
Great artists like Michelangelo and Raphael were appointed to paint, plan buildings, design graves and memorials for the popes and other leaders of the church.
Students, now let's have a look at the architecture during those times. In the 15th century, a huge transformation occurred in the city of Rome. With the encouragement from the popes to study the history of Rome, many studied the remains of old Roman buildings.
These studies were used to bring back the old Roman style of architecture, which was characterized by tall pillars, arches and domes in buildings.
Thus, a new style of architecture emerged from the revival of the old Roman style, which was termed as a classical style. As a result, the wealthy merchants, popes and aristocrats employed architects to bring in classical architecture style to their buildings. This also led to the identification of artists individually by their name, who were until then only known as member of groups or guilds, etc. There were a few individuals who had equal skill in painting, sculpture and architecture.
Michelangelo can be cited as a classic example of an artist with skill in painting, sculpture and architecture. The painting in the Sistine Chapel, the Pietà sculpture and the design of the dome of St. Peter's Church in Rome stand as epitomes of his excellence in painting, sculpture and architecture. Another architect, Filippo Brunelleschi, who began his career as a sculptor, designed the Duomo of Florence.
Students, one striking element of the Italian architecture in the 16th century is that many of the features of the imperial Roman buildings. Well students, that was all for today's class. See you in the next class. Bye.